Usually when we Christians, Catholics, and others look at the Christian faith, and we usually find ourselves looking at a moral code. It's kind of the first focus of most people. And when they look at that moral code, they usually just kind of resent it because it's a bunch of do's and don'ts. Don't do this, don't do that. And with our rebellious and fickle hearts, we usually just respond to that moral code with, "Who are you to tell me what to do? Don't tread on me. Let me live. You do you." But if we ever stopped and just with that attitude, have we ever just stopped and just asked the question, why does God give us a moral code? Why does God give us the commandments? Now, if you're answering that question in your head right now and you're thinking because God wants to control me in every aspect of my life, that he wants to make me miserable and he wants to make me unhappy, you're wrong. The reason why God gives us a moral code, some rules and laws, is because he wants us to be in a relationship with him. And the way the scriptures describe that relationship with God is covenant. Covenants in ancient time were not just contracts between two persons or two groups. It was much more. It described a sacred family bond, an exchange of persons like family. And as we know, living in families, growing up in families, that every family has rules, written or understood, that keeps the sacred bond of the family together. So God, as our Father, gives us these rules and laws so that we, his children, are able to live in that family. God gives us the laws because of his love for us. And the only response to love is love. So when we hear this law and these rules, our response should be, how can I give? How can I love? And this is where we pick up the story in the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses, having gone through the 40 years within the wilderness, now comes to that moment before they enter into the promised land. And he has just recounted to this new generation of Israelites the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments that were given on Mount Sinai. And after giving and recounting those 10 Commandments, he then puts an emphasis and a focus on the first commandment, that you shall not have other gods besides him. Why is that? Well, our hearts are rebellious and they're fickle. And usually the first breaking of a commandment is that first commandment with the various idols that we have. And that's what happened with the Israelites. From the golden calf all the way throughout those 40 years, they continually rebelled and were unfaithful to that first commandment, which had critical and consequences in the rest of the community. So Moses puts a focus and an effort to try and curb that heart, that rebellious heart. And he brings to us the Shema, which is just the Hebrew word for hear. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Now, pious Jews of that generation would have to recite that Shema twice a day, morning and evening. They would put it in their phylacteries, which was on their foreheads and on their sleeves. It was a constant reminder for them of the covenant fidelity that God had with them and their response to that covenant in love to him. And the point of the whole thing was to move from just a mere mechanical obedience and recitation of this Shema, but to actually move inward into their hearts, for it to conform and transform their hearts so that they are actually able to live it, to love God with all their heart, with all their mind, and with all their strength. The proper response to God is love, and to give themselves in love to him. Now, in the fullness of time, God proves that love for us. He reveals that God is not just a command of love. He is love. It's his being. It's who he is. And as God has revealed himself as love, he reveals that in the person of Jesus Christ. And here we pick up in the gospel where he responds to the scribe, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus doesn't give him one commandment, he gives him two. And that great commandment to love God and to love neighbor joins us together in that sacred family bond. He is the giver of the law back at Mount Sinai, the giver of the law at Deuteronomy. Now he's the giver of the law here. And he's giving us the law for us to live the interior movement of our own heart, to love God and to love our neighbor, joining us together in that sacred family bond. So united are they. And how does God prove that love for us? How does he live out that commandment? Because he's not just merely talk. Well, we look to the cross, that supreme sacrifice of love that God gives for us in offering his only begotten Son as both priest and victim, so that we can enter into not just the covenant of old that was written on stone tablets, but to enter into a new and eternal covenant with God. A law now that is not just written on stone tablets, but written upon our hearts, so that it actually can be transformed, can be conformed to him, so that we can actually live this law of love in our life. And we just don't recite it and have it marked on our foreheads and on our shoulders within phylacteries, but we come and renew that covenant with God every time we receive the sacraments. And most importantly, within the Eucharist, where that one sacrifice offered once for all is made present to us in an unbloodied manner. Why? Because Jesus is the true high priest. He lives and he intercedes for us at the right hand of the Father. He is acting in our life, interceding on our behalf. And all he desires from us, all he asks of us, is love. To love him. And our response to that is by coming to Holy Mass to renew that covenant with him. But the question then goes out, how can I love the God that I cannot see? Which gives us the joining of a sacred family bond, to love your neighbor. And we go out from Holy Mass, being renewed in that worship, to go out and be able to love others in the services that we provide, in the gift of ourselves. Now, pious Jews were able to recite that Shema twice a day, every day, morning and evening. It was given to them to help them renew the covenant every day. Now, not every one of us are able to make it to Holy Mass every day. So what do? How are we supposed to continually keep this in our minds and in our hearts? Well, we're already doing it. We just need to be intentional about it and be reminded of it. Every time we make the sign of the cross, we are saying Shema. Love the Lord with all your mind, soul, with all your heart, and with all your strength. Every time we make that sign of the cross, we are renewing our love for the Lord. And we're also reminding ourselves of the gift of ourselves, our love for our neighbor, how we live our life for them. And the more we conform our lives to the cross, the way that God has loved us, then we're not just living the 10 Commandments, which we are. We're not just living the great commandments, which we are, but we're able to live the new commandment that God gives to his disciples: to love as he has loved us. Because he loves us from the cross, and he shows us and proves that love for us there. The more we make that sign of the cross in prayer, the more we are conforming our life to that cross, to imitate him as disciples. See, if you take that love story out of our faith and the practice of our faith, sure, you're going to get a list of do's and don'ts. But if you insert that love into the practice of your faith, well then, our lives change. Because it's not just a mere command. It's a relationship, a covenant with our God.